先讲这个神迹呢，有一个意思哈。
And today we purposely scheduled the last miracle because we have a special meaning in mind.
因为我们教会安排的这个主题是这个季度是复兴作为这个主题。
And the reason why we selected this one is because to correspond to church's theme this quarter, which is called revival.
这个神迹的告诉我们呢，当时门徒收获了153条大鱼。
And this miracle illustrated that when the disciples counted the fish, they counted 153 fishes.
也就是这个网拉上来有很多很多的收获。
And so when they pull this net ashore, pour into the boat, there is a huge harvest.
这就是教会复兴的这个景象。
And this is the scene of what a revived church should look like.
第一个方面呢，今天是今年的最后一个月份了。
And the other reason why we select this miracle is because this December is last month of the year 2023.
这个神迹的主题是满网而归。
And the theme of this miracle is called fish net full of fish.
也希望我们这个今年呢，这个最后呢，都能够得到满满的收获。
And we all wish all of us can have a full kind of like harvest for this year.
使我们人生有满足的喜乐。
And so all of us can be satisfied and happy with what we've got this year.
好，我们现在就开始讲这个神迹的这个教训。
So we will dive into the teachings of this miracle.
这是耶稣在复活以后向门徒显现力的一个过程。
And this miracle, the background of this miracle is happened is after Jesus' resurrection.
我们知道耶稣复活以后，在地上有40天的时间。
And we all knew, as we are aware, after Jesus resurrected, he stayed on this earth for 40 days.
他向玛利亚显现，也向约翰、雅各、彼得他们显现。
And he appeared to a number of people, such as Mary, Jacob, and Peter.
后来12个门徒在房子里面很害怕的时候，关起门来的时候，耶稣又向他们显现。
And in one of those occasions, when all 12 disciples gathered together, Jesus appeared to them as well.
当时耶稣向门徒显现的时候，有告诉他们说。
And when Jesus appeared to, in his resurrected form to the disciples, he told them.
也说我愿你们平安。
And he said, "Peace unto you."
耶稣要告诉他们去传福音。
And Jesus asked them, instruct them to go preach the good news.
因为当时门徒在恐惧中间，觉得我们的先生都死掉了。
Because the background in that setting was the disciples were really afraid because their master just died.
那我们该怎么办呢？大家心中很害怕。
And so they were afraid, they were scared, they didn't know what to do.
耶稣首先告诉他们说：“愿你们平安。”
And so Jesus knew their fear in their hearts, and the first thing he said to them, he said, "May you guys all have peace."
对那个心中很恐惧的多马呢，耶稣说：“多马，你伸过你的指头来探探我肋旁。”
And then Jesus specifically selected Thomas out of this group and says, Thomas, because he knew Thomas doubted him the most, saying, "Thomas, reach out your hand and touch my mark of the nail."
因为多马这个人胆子特别小。
And Thomas is known, very well known for being very timid.
其他门徒看见耶稣的时候，他不在场。
And in one of the previous occasion when other disciples saw Jesus' resurrected form, Thomas happened to be not there.
后来那些门徒很高兴，他说：“我们看见主了。”他不相信。
And so when disciples overjoyed and recounted their experience with resurrected Jesus, Thomas did not believe a word of what they told them.
意思是说，你们看到的耶稣是不是真的，我都不相信。
And he doubted their words, and he questioned whether or not they actually truly saw Jesus.
如果我看见了呢，我要去证实一下，要手去摸摸他那个肋旁的那个枪上这个那个钉痕。
And he questioned them, and he said if it were him seeing Jesus, he would want to touch him to make sure.
他这个话讲呢，耶稣当然当时不在场。耶稣后来看见他的时候，他说：“丢马，你伸过指头来摸摸吧。”
Of course, when Thomas said that to his fellow disciples, Jesus wasn't there. But Jesus knew what Thomas said. So when he saw Thomas, he said, "Come and touch me."
多马当时就很羞愧了。
And at those words, Thomas were very ashamed.
他就知道耶稣知道他心中的所想的。
And he knew Jesus was real, and Jesus knew what was in his heart.
他就匍匐在地，他说：“我的主，我的上帝啊！”
And he fell face down and says, "My Lord, my King."
他没有任何怀疑的理由了。
And he no longer had any reasons to doubt.
这帮门徒后来在一起，在耶稣又不见的时候，他们又无所事事，哎呀，心里很没有方向。
And so once Jesus departed from them, the disciples gathered together, and all of a sudden they felt they had no direction. They don't know what to do.
这个时候呢，彼得就出了个主意。
And so at that moment, Peter came up with an idea.
他说：“大家没有事情，我们也不知道干什么，就我去打鱼去。”
And Peter said, "Hey, since we are all idle and we don't know what to do, I'm going to go fishing."
那些门徒说：“那好，那我们要跟你一起去。”
And his fellow disciple says, "Okay, if you're going, we will go with you."
他们就去了，就去打鱼去了。
And so they went fishing.
那天晚上发生一件事情。
And however, that night when they went fishing, something happened.
这个是那天发生一个事情，就是那天一个晚上打鱼，没有打到一条鱼。
And what happened was they went fishing for the whole night and they did not catch one single fish.
当然这是耶稣在里面布局了。
Of course, Jesus overruled the event that night.
这种事情会可能发生吗？
And it itself is almost like a felt miracle when there's not one single fish was being caught that night.
我说过了，你赚了很多钱，可能是神迹。
And sometimes I would say when you make a lot of money, it might be a miracle.
你赚不到一分钱，也可能是神迹。
But on the opposite side, if you don't make one single penny, it could also be a miracle.
你的事情顺利是神迹。
And so when things go well, it is a blessing.
你的事情不顺利也是神迹。
When things did not go well, sometimes it's blessing in disguise as well.
那天整夜劳碌，没有打着什么鱼。
And so the disciples, this group, toiled all night and they did not catch one single fish.
这个问题就在他们那一夜并没有打着什么。
And so if you saw the verse, it says that night they didn't get anything.
我们给他一个前面我讲是没有方向的辛劳呢，这个打不到东西的。
And so when you embark on an endeavor and there's no direction, no aim, sometimes you will catch nothing.
海里的鱼好像是很听话的，耶稣没有允许他，这个鱼就不入他的网。
And so that night, the fish obeyed Jesus. When Jesus did not give them permission, the fish
就告诉门徒说：“你们没有方向的这种劳苦是得不到什么东西的。”
And I think the message Jesus is trying to send is a purpose without direction is going to end up in vain.
我们经常不是有一句话吗？
And we often there's a saying in the Bible.
若不是耶和华看守城池，
If Jesus is wrong for Jesus to watch over the city,
看守的人就枉然警醒。
and then the watchman will end up in vain.
一切工作都要在主里面才有东西得到。
And for all of the work to have gain, to have a purpose, and to have some sort of benefit and harvest, it needs to depend on Jesus.
你想凭着自己去劳苦去得什么？你想自己去做什么事情，没有收获。
And if you expect with your own efforts and you will gain something meaningful, spiritual, it is in vain.
所以这个环境的出现呢，让门徒心中有一种感觉。
And so Jesus arranged that environment that night is so that he meant to teach disciples a lesson.
奇怪了，今天怎么打了这么多长时间，怎么没有鱼啊？
So they just wondered among themselves why we fished the whole night and we caught nothing.
其实这种事情出现过一次哈。
And but this type of event happened before actually.
有一次耶稣讲了以后，叫门徒说：“你们到水深去水深的地方去撒网。”
And one time after Jesus' sermon, Jesus asked the disciple to go out into the deep water and to cast a net.
当时彼得有开口讲话，
And at that time, Peter spoke up.
他说：“主啊，我们正义劳碌都得不到什么东西，我听从你的话，我们就撒网。”
And so Peter says, Lord, we had tried all night before. We didn't get anything, but okay, we will obey you and go out and cast a net.
他虽然听耶稣的话呢，但是出于不得已，你告诉我们，我们不得已去撒。
And he went out with a lot of reluctance on his part because he did not actually go out willingly.
那天也是劳苦了，得不到东西。
And the same thing happened that night. They did not catch anything.
今天也是这种情况。
And today, this situation reappeared.
我们给他一个定义说，没有方向的劳苦呢，一无所获。
And so what we are saying and what's the instruction here is hard work without direction gains nothing.
再说的广泛一点，所罗门说：“虚空的虚空，虚空的虚空。”
And if we broaden that out, we extend that out, this is what I think King Solomon says, meaningless and meaningless, everything is meaningless.
所罗门又说，都是仆风啊，都是要做那个风一样的。
And Solomon, King Solomon actually even further clarifies, says this is like chasing after the wind.
这个升级的开场白呢，耶稣就是让大家没有收获。
And so the beginning of the event that night is started with hard work without any gain.
好，第二句话呢，耶稣就出现了。
And so once they caught nothing, once that setting is laid out, Jesus then appeared.
那么打鱼都是晚上打鱼的。
And we all know fishermen goes out at night.
这个天刚蒙蒙亮。
And before the dawn breaks.
这是耶稣站在大概是200米的地方呢，耶稣在岸上说话。
And Jesus then spoke to them about 200 meters away from them.
他说：“小子，你们有吃的没有？”
And he said, "Children, have you any food?"
看不清楚是谁了。
And so, because it was still a bit of far away, they couldn't see who that was.
只是大声地对他说：“你们小子们，你们有吃的没有？”
And they heard Jesus shout it, kind of like say in a loud voice, say, "Children, have you any food?"
他们回答说没有。
They answered him, said no.
大家知道这句话的意思吗？
Do you know what that means?
耶稣其实就问问他们的处境。
And Jesus wants to find out their situation.
劳苦了，劳累了，肚子饿了。
And Jesus wants them to describe their situation and circumstance they are in. They worked all night, they are hungry, yet they have nothing.
那里有个声音说：“小子们啊，有吃的没有？”
And they heard a voice asking them, "Have you any food?"
对饿肚子的人说：“你们有吃的没有？”
And it is a bit probably hard to hear when you're hungry, when people ask you, "Have you any food?"
那你耶稣就了解他们的境况嘛。
But Jesus knows their dilemma.
那提醒他们现在这个情形啊，
And remind them of the circumstances they are in.
要让他们自己回答出来呀，讲出来呀。
And he wants them to voice that out themselves.
他说没有。
And they answered him, says no.
好，我们再看第3点，耶稣对他们说：“你们把网撒在船的右边。”
And after they answered no, Jesus says, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat."
就必得着。
and you will find some.
好，这是一个今天这个话题的中心内容。
And today, what I just read is the focus of today's sermon.
既然是没有，你就把网呢撒到船的右边。
And since you up to this point you gain nothing, cast the net now on the right side of the boat. You will find some.
这时候岸边呢，就是耶稣所在的地方，正在门徒的右边，船的右边。
And the right side actually correlates where Jesus is to the disciple, because Jesus is on the shore, and which is right side to the disciple.
也就是说，你们的网原来是撒在那边的，现在撒到这边来，这边就是耶稣这边。
And Jesus knew that for the whole night, their net was cast on the left side of the boat. And now he asked them to cast on the right side of the boat where Jesus is.
就必得着。
And he said, not only you need to do that, but I can guarantee you will gain something.
右边在圣经中有些特殊的一些表达。
And the right side has a lot of special meanings in the Bible.
右边呢，耶稣坐在上帝的右边。
And if you recall, Jesus is sitting on the right side of God.
上帝呢用右手将耶稣高举。
And the God lifted Jesus on his using his right hand.
圣经又说呢，义人的心呢是居右的。
And the Bible also said the heart of the righteousness man actually is tilt toward the right side.
这句话好像是我们心脏是在左边的，他说义人的心是居在右边的。
And this the sentence about talking about the heart of the righteous seems to be a bit of a conflicting with our physical body where the heart is.
圣经上面对右边有特殊的一种含义的。
And reading through the Bible, you know, right side has special meaning contained.
好像约瑟为孩子祝福啊，也是左手右手都有关系的。
And so, for example, when Joseph is blessing his children, he is very particular about right side and left side.
对所爱的孩子呢，他用右手来祝福。
And for the children he loved, he used his right hand.
颜色也圣经上也有一种表达哈。
And not only just on the side that the Bible normally has special meanings, and Bible also has special meanings sometimes about colors.
好像蓝色呢预表天空哈，
And the blue color represents heaven.
上帝宝座所在的这个地方用这个蓝色来表达。
And we often says where the throne of God is, it's often represented by the color of blue.
紫色呢就是表示尊贵了哈。
And the purple means honor and royalty.
红色呢代表流血了。
And red represents the color of blood.
朱红色是预表救赎。
And scarlet color represents salvation.
这些都有它的含义。
And so if you study the Bible, you know there's certain terms have very special meanings.
意思说你得不到东西呢，你得不到鱼，今天把网撒在右边就一定能够得到。
And so Jesus said, since you had gained nothing all night, cast a net on the right side and you will find some.
你整夜劳苦得不到，为什么原因呢？因为你没有了方向。
And you toil the whole night and you gain nothing. Why? It's because you had no direction.
耶稣虽然看不见，你们在那里无所事事，要去打鱼去。
And while they couldn't see Jesus, they decided that there's nothing they can do, so they decided to go fishing.
你们要忘记了自己的使命是做什么的。
And Jesus wanted to remind them, it's not like they actually had nothing to do. They actually had a mission.
所以你得不到任何东西。
And because they decided to do something that's not their mission, they gained nothing.
结果门徒呢就把网撒在这个右边。
And so the disciple decided to cast a net on the right side.
这时候又出现一个神迹。
And another miracle at that time surfaced as well.
这一网撒下去呢，我拉不上来了，因为鱼太多了。
And so once they cast, now they were not able to draw it in because the multitude of fish.
好，为什么呢？
Why?
哎，我那个，他那个，哦，在这里。为什么呢？因为在耶稣里面，我们人生才能够有收获。
Why? That is because it's pretty clear for our life to be full of harvest, we need to put ourselves in Jesus Christ.
我们做工的人也是一样的。
And that is the same for workers.
我们为主做工，为主劳碌，
When we work for Jesus and when we toil for him,
我们要把我们的灵魂的锚，我们的工作的重心都要放在耶稣身上。
and we need to anchor our soul, our heart on Jesus.
在主里面才能够得到你所能够得到的。
Only in Jesus can you get.
如果你的人生离开耶稣，你就没有任何的收获。
And only in Jesus you can gain things. Apart from Jesus, you will gain nothing.
两手空空嘛。
And we will come with empty-handedness.
人生如果没有基督的话，你人生收获什么呢？
And without Jesus in your life, what do you actually get?
身外之物什么都要放下。
And all the material things, in the end, it will become nothing.
耶稣叫我们人生有收获，有成果，有果子。
And Jesus wants us to be fruitful in our lives.
耶稣说过了，这个果子你要连在葡萄树上才有结果子。
And the only way to be fruitful is to stay connected to the vine.
人生如果不连在果子上面，就是枝子就会枯干，就会掉下来，就被火烧掉。
And without being connected to the vine, the branches will wither and will fall off.
生活上是这样，品格上是这样，工作上也是这样。
And this applies to our life, this applies to our character, this applies to who we are.
耶稣说：“离了我，你们就不能做什么。”
And Jesus said very clearly, apart from me, you will have nothing.
所以所罗门最后的感叹呢，就是告诉我们说，在日光之下呢，没有新的事情。
And that is part of the reason why King Solomon, after his glorious life, said, under the sun, there's nothing new. There's no new things.
都是虚空，都是仆风。
Everything is meaningless and everything is chasing after the wind.
经上还有一句话说：“不是虚空，那是虚无。”
And Jesus, the Bible also says it's not only is meaningless, it's nothingness.
有人说虚空和虚无不是一样的吗？
And sometimes people confuse the meaningless with nothingness.
怎么说不是虚空，又还是那是虚无呢？
And why, like, we actually go a step further from meaningless says not only what you're doing is meaningless, but it's actually nothingness.
我告诉大家哈，这个虚空呢是个灵，
And the meaningless is more of like a feeling of a spiritual feeling.
这个叫做虚空。
And this is what we call meaningless.
虚无呢就是欠债，
And nothingness means like you're actually in the context of spiritual life, you're actually indebted to Jesus.
人生不是归零就算数了的。
And so when we are often, if we just say, hey, you know, I gained nothing, I didn't do nothing, I'm in the end, I'm zero. But for Christians, being zero is not good enough because we are actually indebted to Jesus.
归零总是说没有嘛，
And when people saying, hey, you know, in the end, I gave up everything and everything is meaningless and I'm, you know, that's it. Like I die with nothing.
死了嘛，什么都没有。
And if I die and I have nothing.
虚无呢，就是你不但是没有，还欠了一笔债。
And but yeah, like for Christians, dying does not cancel all your debt. Dying without being converted means you're actually indebted to Jesus' sacrifice.
人生不是一走了之的。
And so for us who are redeemed by Jesus, dying does not cancel all our debt.
我们还欠了一笔债，
We still owe Jesus a debt.
这个债就是我们人生中所欠下来的，对耶稣、对律法所欠的所有债。
And this debt accumulated through our whole lifetime and for all the transgression we committed and for all the ungratefulness toward Jesus we have accumulated.
所以这是圣经告诉我们人生的结局了。
And that is why the Bible tells us the end of humans.
耶稣叫这帮人把网撒在右边，就拉不上来的鱼。
And so when Jesus told this disciple to cast a net on the right side, and the net was too full.
就改变一下你人生的方向吧。
And because Jesus wanted to change the direction of your life.
你在耶稣里面就有满满的得到。
And in Jesus, now you are full of harvest.
所以我取个名字说，真实安全的丰富呢是为主而获，为
And
主是获。
so the true harvest is for the Lord is gain.
只有耶稣是我们人生的收获。
And so if we gain Jesus, that is a true harvest.
我们要把网撒在船的右边。
And so we need to cast our net, each one of us on the right side of the boat.
我们要把人生转到在基督里。
And so we need to turn our life away from the world and into Jesus.
没有地方是我们人生要追求的方向。
And there's no other destination that we should pursue.
只有在基督里，我们这个才是我们的方向。
And the only direction we should pursue is how do we turn toward Jesus.
门徒一看到这个网拉不上来，就有点奇怪咯。
And so the disciples were really surprised when they couldn't pull the net up.
天刚蒙蒙亮了。
And the dawn is breaking.
彼得后来就发现，他说：“这是主。”
And so Peter starts able to make outline of the person on the shore.
他就那么那个性格了。
And he immediately recognized it was Jesus.
他就把上衣就脱掉，就游泳过去了。
And Jesus is a very straightforward person, so he took off his outer garment and just swam over.
这个场景预备呢，就是耶稣其实在那里预备好了，有烤的鱼都烤好了。
And once he got there, he saw Jesus actually have prepared the whole setting on the shore.
耶稣不是问他们小子们有吃的没有？他们说没有。
And so when Jesus asked him, have you any food? Jesus actually was already preparing all the food on the shore.
耶稣这个时候叫门徒你去看看那个鱼有多少拉上来。
And so Jesus then asked the disciple to go count the fish they harvested.
这里很具体的，那些门徒呢，肯定有数过的，他就回去就把那个网拉上来，那大鱼呢153条。
And so the description was very detailed in this passage, and says the disciple counted the fish and 153 big fish.
我估计他们一生一世没有得到过一网打了那么多的鱼。
My assumption is never in their lifetime they had caught that many fish in that one setting.
耶稣说：“把那个鱼呢，也拿过几条来放在火上烤吧。”
And so Jesus, since already prepared all the fire and everything on shore, and asked them to bring the fish over to roast.
大家呢就坐下来就吃了。
And so they sat around the fire and start eating.
经上面有句话说：“他们没有一个人敢问你是谁。”
And the verses actually says none of them dare to ask Jesus, "Who are you?"
当然他们知道是耶稣了，
But I think deep down they knew it was Jesus.
但是不敢开口说为什么今天会碰到这个情况。
But they did not dare to utter the question.
我们想这句话，你就知道他们心里当时怎么样一个心理状态。
And we can imagine their situation at that moment.
就像小孩子做错了事的那种情景。
And they must have felt like children who are guilty.
我们在主面前多少羞愧啊！
And they've probably felt ashamed before the Lord.
闲着没事去打鱼啊！
And we thought we didn't have anything to do, so we actually went fishing.
忘记了我们是干什么的。
And we probably forgot who we are and what Lord wants us to do.
劳苦了，鱼也没有得到。
And not only we did not obey the Lord, and we went out and we toiled whole night, we got nothing.
耶稣关心我们呢，就马上网撒下去，在他这一边马上就打到那么多的鱼。
And yet the Lord still cared about us and asked us to cast a net on the right side.
他们就好像做错了事的小孩子一样。
The picture that we can imagine in our head is they must have felt like a guilty child.
非常非常的难受。
So they were very saddened.
好，最后一幕呢，
And so the last scene of this miracle,
耶稣就问彼得了，
and Jesus actually purposely singled Peter out.
在吃饭的时候，耶稣就问了彼得3次。
And as they sat around eating, Jesus singled Peter out, asked him a question 3 times.
他说：“约翰的儿子西门，你爱我吗
He said, Simon, son of John, do you love me?？”
这是一个考试题，
And this is a test question.
人生的考题。
And this is a test of life.
我们人生都要领到，你说信耶稣不用考试，这个是考试。
And but often we say to be a Christian, you don't have to pass any tests, but this is probably a test for Peter.
这个考试题有一些只有全世界人都一样的，就是这么一个题目。
And this, for all Christians, we actually probably all have same test question.
你得救不得救啊，都就是这一个题目。
And whether or not a Christian is saved or not, you have to be able to pass this test question.
我前次说过一个题目，我说得救的标准是什么？
And in one of the previous sermons, I asked, what is the criteria of being saved?
哪个人得救？用哪个尺度去量他这个长的还是短的？所有的题目就是一个。
And how do we measure when a person is saved or not? And I think we all know the question.
得救的标准也就是一个。
And there's one criteria, one standard for being saved.
你爱我吗？
And that question, that test question is, do you love me?
得救绝对不会说你做了哪件事，做了哪件事，做了哪件事，没有的。
Whether or not you're saved is not going to depend on your actions.
这个题目就是你爱我吗？
And whether or not you're saved is how you answer the question, do you love me?
耶稣在这个时候问彼得这个问题啊，
And Jesus chose to ask Peter at this question at that moment.
不但是问彼得了，其实就是告诉在座的每个门徒。
Not only was meant to ask Peter that question, but he meant to ask all the disciples that question.
那些门徒也在听嘛。
And because all those disciples were listening too.
彼得回答这个问题呢，现在不是像以前那个方法。
And so the way Peter chose to answer that question was different from the way he used it before.
如果是以前呢，彼得会说：“这还用得说吗？我爱你，肯定的哦。”
And if the old Peter would say, why are you asking that question? Of course I love you.
他回答的还比别人更加好，我比别人更爱你。
And the old Peter would say, I love you more than other people love you.
12个门徒中间就是我最爱你。
And Lord, I'm probably the one who love you the most out of all the disciples.
他这个话以前说过的。
Because he said that when Jesus was still alive.
他在耶稣面前保证，他说：“别人虽然跌倒，我永远不会的。”
Because he pledged his unfailing love to Jesus when Jesus asked him before.
意思说我这条命都给你，我不怕的。
He said he was willing to lay down his life for Jesus.
大家知道后来呢，他跌倒了，
We all know the story. He stumbled.
跌倒的比其他门徒都惨。
And he stumbled worse than other disciples.
他3次呢不认耶稣。
He denied Jesus 3 times.
这个时候说耶稣问他这个问题是有理由的。
And so that is probably the reason why Jesus asked him, singled him out, asked him that question.
他说：“约翰的儿子西门，你爱我吗
And he said to him, Simon, do you love me? ？”
这个时候彼得就这个口气就不一样了。
And so when Jesus asked him the 3rd time, Peter starts to feel really bad.
他说：“主啊，你知道我爱你。
And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.
你看看我应该是爱你的。
And he said, look at me. I think you know all things. You know I love you.
每当他这样回答以后，
Every time he answered that way,
你喂养我的羊，
and Jesus would tell him, then go feed my sheep.
就是我这些羊需要你去喂养，
And Jesus is entrusting his sheep to Peter
因为你爱我。
because you love me.
你去爱那些需要喂养的羊。
And because you love me, please love the sheep that needs to be fed.
第二次再问，
And the second time he asked,
彼得还是这样表达，
and Peter said again, says, you know I love you.
耶稣也同样说：“你喂养我的羊。”
And then Jesus repeated, says, feed my sheep.
大家要思考一下耶稣问3次，
And we have to reflect on this, why Jesus asked him 3 times.
彼得回答是同样的答案。
And Peter answered Jesus the same way all 3 times.
耶稣交给他的任务是同一个任务，
And the task that Jesus gave to him is the same, remains the same.
也就是我们爱主的人能够在世上活着，主给你的任务就是去救更多的灵魂。
And Jesus is telling all Christians who loves him, saying, if you love me, then feed my sheep.
基督就为我们死啊，
And Jesus sacrificed his life for us.
他就是要救别人的灵魂。
And the sacrifice is for the salvation of souls.
今天爱耶稣的人能够参与这个救人的工作，
And all of the Christians who love him need to join in that work.
这就是我们的使命。
And that is our mission.
教会要复兴，
And for church to get revived,
你要编织一只网，
we need to weave a net.
编织一只一个爱的网络。
And the net is not any net, it's a net of love.
你要得人如得鱼嘛。
And you need to gain man as fishermen of fish
你要得那个人，
in order to win the soul.
好像打鱼人得那个鱼一样。
As the fishermen are gaining the fish,
你需要一只网，
and we need a net.
这只有网撒下去，这个鱼才能够收获。
And only when the net is cast out will there be gain.
耶稣讲那个马太福音最后一个比喻，就耶稣说，天国好像撒网的，把网撒在海里。
And Jesus said in one of the proverbs, says the heaven is like a net that needs to be cast out.
这个网就是福音的网，
And that net is a net of gospel.
救恩的网，
It's a net of salvation.
要聚拢各样的水族。
And it needs to gather all the things that needs to be gathered in the net.
所以这个网呢是用爱心来编织的。
And what is the material we need to use to weave that net? It is love.
我们哪个人得救，不是耶稣爱来俘虏我们吗？
And which one of us are not saved because of the love of Jesus?
耶稣在我们身上所撒下的那个网，就是把我们拉下来的时候，那个网就是爱心的网。
And the net that Jesus cast and to pull us ashore is a net of love.
把你搞到无路可走，也是那个网。
And a lot of times when we feel like we're hopeless,
好像雅各一样，
like Jacob,
他的蒙恩就是上帝的网，把他网住的。
and the reason why Jacob was saved was because Jesus cast a love net around him.
他做错了事，
And Jacob committed transgressions,
逃到路斯的旷野，
and he had to live a life of fugitive.
上帝在那里预备天梯，
And yet God prepared the ladder of heaven for him.
使他能够看见自己的出路。
And so that he could see where he can go.
他到了舅舅家里，
And once he arrived at his uncle's house,
上帝预备一个苛刻的舅舅，
and God prepared a very harsh uncle for him.
使他能够直接面对自己所犯的那个错。
And so that Jacob, through those interactions with his uncle, can confront his own sins.
他被他舅舅这个像我们中国人宰的宰杀的光光的，
And his uncle took a great advantage of him.
受尽痛苦。
And he suffered quite a bit under his hand.
这是上帝预备爱的网络。
And yet all of those is part of God's net of love.
他回来的时候碰到他的哥哥，
And on his way back after exile, he ran into his brother.
他面对他兄弟的那种情形，
And the moment the moment he confronting his brother,
他深深的懊悔
and he felt great remorse.
啊，这些都是爱的网络。
And all of those are part of the net of love that Jesus cast around Jacob.
这个苦难的人生造就了一个雅各。
And all the suffering, all the hardship that Jacob went through made Jacob to be who he was.
所以耶稣叫彼得，他说：“你喂养我的羊呢。”
And so when Jesus told Peter the saying, "Feed my sheep,"
同刚才这个153条大鱼的那个网一样。
and he is speaking of the net. He's referring to the net that caught the 153 fish.
你要得人如得鱼呢，你要得人如得鱼呢，一定要有这张网。
And he said, in order for you to win souls, you need to have a net.
这张网就是你爱我嘛。
And that net is based on the answer, "Do you love me?" to the question, "Do you love me?"
你爱我比这些更深吗？
Do you love me more than you love anything else?
有人在研究这个爱我比这些更深，这些是什么？
And some people studying Bible is trying to find out what Jesus mean when he said, "Do you love me more than anything else?" and what it means anything else.
有人说这些可能是指着这个鱼吧。
And some saying, "Oh, maybe Jesus referred to the fish."
有人说这个可能是指着那其他的门徒吧。
Or maybe Jesus is referring to other disciples.
其实这些就是除了耶稣之外的什么是一切。
And for us, for me, I felt Jesus referred to anything else means anything that's apart from Jesus.
你要把爱耶稣放在第一位，
And we need to prioritize loving Jesus.
那么你一定是得人如得鱼。
And if you do that, then you're going to winning soul as if as if fishermen are gaining the fish.
我们教会需要复兴呢，
And a church needs to be revived.
这张网也同样要撒出去。
And for a church to be revived, we need to cast that net
要
out.
叫弟兄姊妹，要叫所有需要的人能够聚拢来这个网里面。
So we can get all the people who are in need of Jesus into that net.
啊，这里有个小插曲，
And there's a little episode.
耶稣就很直接对彼得说
And Jesus said directly to Peter,
他说：“我告诉你，
he said, I'm telling you,
你现在是自由人，
and you're a free man.
你可以随意东走西走都没有关
You
系。
can go wherever you want.
到有一天呢，
But one day,
你要失去自由，
you will lose freedom.
这是个预言呢。
And this is a prophecy Jesus is telling to Peter.
神要把你手捆起来呢，你要带你到不愿意去的地方。
And he said that people will tie your hands and lead you to where you don't want to go.
这是耶稣直接对彼得讲到他幕后的这个受苦的经
And
历。
this is Jesus prophesizing the end of Peter's life to him.
彼得听到了也就接受，
And Peter, upon hearing those words, accepted.
他也知道人生以后要为主受苦的。
And he knew that his life will end up suffering for Jesus' sake.
但是他又关心，他这个性格就这样啊。
But Peter is a very straightforward and curious personality, has a very straightforward, curious personality.
他说：“主啊，这个人会怎么样？”
And when Jesus told him his fate and how he will end up, and he got just really curious because that's just who he is. Then he pointed to the other disciple. He said, "What happened to that person?"
我想知道他以后的遭遇会怎
He
么样。
said, "Lord, I want to know what's going to happen to that person."
耶稣的回答很有意思，
And Jesus gave him a very interesting reply.
他说：“我如果要他等到我来的时候，同你有什么关系呢？
And Jesus says, "If I want him to stay alive until I return, what has got to do with you?
你只管来跟从我就
You
是。
just need to mind your own kind of business and then follow me."
所以彼得当时听到这句话呢，有一点就同门徒讲了，就同门徒说了，就同其他人说了。
And Peter is such wear his motions on sleeve, so he turned around and tell other disciples.
他说：“耶稣让约翰能够以后等到他再来。”
He said, "Let me tell you, I think Jesus will keep John alive until he returns."
这个小道消息就传出去了。
And so this grapevine then went wild.
其实耶稣讲这个话的意思呢，别人的道路，上帝怎么引导他，同你没有关系。
But I don't think that's what Jesus meant. What Jesus meant says other people's Christian journey has nothing to do with you. Just focus on your own journey.
你的路怎么走，我就怎么引导你。
And he said, I will guide you on your journey and how you should walk that journey.
当然，耶稣以后约翰以后在拔摩海岛上也看到耶稣再来嘛。
And John actually saw the vision of Jesus' second coming on the Patmos island.
耶稣讲这个话也没有错了。
And so what Jesus said was not necessarily inaccurate.
在意象中看到。
And John did actually see Jesus' second coming in a dream, in a vision.
当时门徒心中会有一种错觉的。
And the disciple might have a misconception.
这一般门徒总有这种错觉。
And a lot of those disciples had a misconception at that time.
觉得耶稣基督马上就会快来了。
And that misconception at that time was pretty prevailing. Was they thought Jesus' second coming was imminent.
因为耶稣在升天的时候，不是那个天使不是说了嘛，这个以后他要降云降临嘛。
And because when Jesus ascended to the heaven, the angels were saying, the Lord will come back again.
他说：“加利利人啊，你们为什么举目望天呢？你们被接升天的耶稣，你看他怎么去，要怎么来？”
And because the angels told them, saying, "Why are you looking up the heaven? However, Jesus went in the manner he went, he will come back, return again."
所以我们在场的这些人，如果在那天看到了，也会这样想的：耶稣快要来了。
And so that was part of the cause of the misconception among the disciples, that they think that Jesus' second return, second coming, was imminent.
昨天晚上讲到这个属灵的气氛，有哪些属灵的气氛呢？
And last night's Bible study, they was talking about spiritual atmosphere.
那个时候门徒那个属灵气氛是不得了的好。
And I think the spiritual atmosphere at that time among the disciples was really robust.
大家天天在楼房上面祈祷，赞美。
And every day they would pray and they would praise and they would get together.
他们等候耶稣基督再来。
And they were waiting for Jesus' second return.
这个属灵气氛是好的不得了。
And that spiritual atmosphere at that time was really thriving.
家里东西都卖掉，拿到教会里来。
And they sold all their material properties and bring to the church to share.
凡物公用。
And everything is for communal service.
没有私有财产了。
And nobody has any personal properties.
我们除了迎接耶稣再来，就没有别的事情。
And they didn't have any task other than preparing for the Jesus' second coming.
地也不种了。
And they did not even farm the field.
世界上什么事情都不干。
And they did not want to do any worldly affairs.
这是当时门徒错觉领会。
And that was because they misunderstood what Jesus said.
后来搞到耶路撒冷教会维持不下去了嘛，吃饭都没有，都成问题。
And then because of that mindset, the church in Jerusalem was unable to maintain that status.
所以保罗到外邦教会去收那个奉献，都拿到耶路撒冷了。
And so Apostle Paul had to go actually gather donations from other church to sustain the church in Jerusalem.
神的思想会错的。
And sometimes we often might misunderstood or misinterpret things.
理解圣经的话语也会错的。
And we might misinterpret what the Bible said.
错不在圣经，是在我们自己。
And that mistake actually lies with us of our thinking, not on the word of the Bible.
好，这个神迹就是表示我们要在主里面，我们才有收获。
And so today's miracle, to summarize, is in order to gain something meaningful in life, we need to be in Jesus Christ.
因为我们人生能够把网撒在右边。
And may all of us can cast our net on the right side of the boat.
有153条大鱼。
So that we can, in the end, we can harvest 153 fish.
还有个神迹呢，
And there's another miracle.
鱼虽然这样多，
And even though they had so many fish,
网却没有破，
the net did not break.
真难得。
That was really rare.
东西这么多，好像承受不了，但是不会破。
And the the net was so full, yet did not break.
这句话很有深意啊。
And it is really profound.
你财产如果这么多，你的网也没有破。
And you had such a hefty harvest, yet the net did not break.
你的知识这么多，你的网也没有破。
And you might have a lot of knowledge. We can put it in a way, it's like you can have a lot of knowledge and the web still did not break.
在耶稣里面的收获都是真的。
And that is because everything we gain in Jesus is real.
都是你的。
It's all belongs to you.
如果不是在耶稣里呢？
And if you did not gain things in Jesus,
你这个网鱼那么多呢，网就会破掉。
and you could have a huge harvest of the material things, but the net would break.
你在世界上得到的东西虽然很多很多，网破掉。
And so you might gain the whole world, but you are not going to be able to hold it.
最后不是你的，
And in the end, it does not belong to you.
只有在主里面才是你的。
Only what you gained in Jesus belongs to you.
好，愿主祝福大家。
May God bless each one of us.